Welcome. You are joining us for a really comprehensive look at an event that fundamentally defined an entire generation. Yet, you know, it remains completely shrouded in layers of mythology that often obscure its true, chaotic, and utterly fascinating history. Our mission today is to trace the complete, unvarnished biography of the 1969 Woodstock Festival. We're going to examine its unbelievable journey, starting from its highly corporate beginnings in a Manhattan office, all the way to its status today as a multi-million-dollar economic engine. To accomplish this, we are pulling from a massive historical archive. We're using original town hall records, municipal permits, corporate financial ledgers, raw medical logs from the site, contemporary news reports, and the unedited audio and video archives. We're going to uncover the facts you likely do not know. We'll detail exactly how the festival was nearly canceled mere days before the gates opened, the unvarnished truth about those famous free tickets, and the surprising list of legendary bands that flat-out rejected an invitation to perform.
To properly analyze this event, we must establish a strictly objective analytical framework. We will be examining the logistical execution, the structural and technical feats of engineering required, and the socio-political backdrop of the era. This analysis will rely solely on the historical documentation we have gathered. We must deliberately set aside the romanticized cultural memory in order to evaluate the factual reality of the festival's organization, its day-to-day execution, and its immense economic and legislative aftermath.
That is exactly where we need to start. Let us look at the corporate origins and the entrepreneurs who actually set this massive machine in motion. The original vision for this festival came from four very different men: Michael Lang, Artie Kornfeld, Joel Rosenman, and John P. Roberts. Now, to understand how this happened, you have to picture New York City in early 1969. Roberts and Rosenman were young, wealthy entrepreneurs. They were in the midst of a major corporate project, actively building a state-of-the-art recording studio complex in Manhattan called Media Sound. Building a recording studio in Manhattan at that time was an incredibly capital-intensive venture. They were businessmen, actively looking for highly viable, profitable investments to multiply their capital. The historical record shows that Michael Lang possessed actual experience as a live music promoter. He had recently co-organized the Miami Pop Festival on the East Coast the previous year. That event successfully drew an estimated 25,000 people over 2 days. Lang and his partner Kornfeld shared a lawyer named Miles Laurie, who had previously done specialized legal work on the Media Sound project for Roberts and Rosenman. Right. And because Laurie knew they had the financial backing, he was the one who suggested that Lang and Kornfeld contact them to seek financing for a totally different project. But here is the fascinating part. The original pitch they made was not for a festival at all. Lang simply wanted to build a much smaller recording studio in Woodstock, New York, a project he informally called the Studio in the Woods. So how did a pitch for a small boutique recording studio turn into a gathering of 500,000 people?
The transition from the studio in the woods concept to a massive outdoor festival represents a critical operational pivot point. Roberts and Rosenman reviewed the proposal and were entirely unpersuaded by the financial projections of building a small rural studio. Instead, utilizing their background in maximizing return on investment, they counterproposed a live concert. Their strategic rationale was highly calculated. They wanted to feature the specific, high-profile artists who were already known to frequent the Woodstock area, a demographic that included prominent musicians like Bob Dylan.
And Kornfeld and Lang actually agreed to this revised higher-yield business model. This agreement led directly to the formal incorporation of the corporate entity known as Woodstock Ventures in January 1969. Once Woodstock Ventures was officially a company, they needed a headquarters. They set up their company offices on an oddly decorated floor at 47 West 57th Street in Midtown Manhattan. They hired a design group called Curtain Call Productions, led by a man named Burt Cohen, to oversee what was described as the psychedelic transformation of the office space. Picture a rigid corporate office building, but inside you have this heavily stylized countercultural aesthetic. From the very beginning, there were massive, distinct differences in the approaches of these four men.
An analysis of their operational dynamics reveals significant friction. John Roberts was highly disciplined and understood the strict mechanics required for a major business venture to remain solvent. Michael Lang envisioned the Woodstock project as a relaxed way for entrepreneurs to connect and conduct business without traditional corporate rigidity. These personality clashes became glaringly evident early on when Lang was initially unable to find a suitable physical site for the concert.
Exactly. Roberts and Rosenman grew increasingly concerned about their investment. They actually had to leave the Manhattan office and take to the road themselves to scout for a venue. These fundamental differences regarding financial discipline frequently made Roberts and Rosenman question whether they should pull the plug entirely or continue pumping their own personal wealth into the project. Given that friction, there had to be a turning point that finally gave the project some real momentum.
The definitive financial catalyst for the event occurred in April 1969. The band Creedence Clearwater Revival became the first major act to sign a performance contract, agreeing to perform for a guaranteed sum of $10,000. When adjusted for inflation to the present day, that figure is equivalent to approximately $88,000. Prior to this specific signing, the promoters faced systemic difficulty securing commitments from high-profile groups. Booking agents were hesitant to commit their clients to an unproven festival run by new promoters.
But the signing of Creedence Clearwater Revival triggered a demonstrable and immediate domino effect within the music industry's booking circuits. Creedence drummer Doug Clifford later provided a direct assessment of this phenomenon, stating on the record that once Creedence signed, everyone else jumped in line and all the other big acts came on. That quote really puts it into perspective. Once the industry saw that real money was changing hands, the floodgates opened. And it is incredibly vital to remember that Woodstock was strictly conceived as a profit-making corporate venture. The entire ticket pricing structure was established to generate significant, immediate revenue. Tickets for the three-day event were priced at $18 if purchased in advance and $24 if purchased at the gate.
To translate that into modern currency for you, that is equivalent to approximately $160 in advance and $210 at the gate. That represents a substantial capital outlay for a young demographic in 1969. To distribute these advance tickets, the organizers implemented a dual strategy. They limited in-person sales to designated record stores in the greater New York City area, and they established a mail-order system via a post office box located at the Radio City Station post office in Midtown Manhattan.
Through these highly controlled methods, they successfully sold approximately 186,000 advance tickets. Based on their internal market projections and the capacity of the sites they were initially scouting, the organizers formally anticipated that approximately 50,000 festival goers would attend. Now, we have to look at the venue procurement process because it was an absolute nightmare. The initial operational plan designated a site located directly in the town of Woodstock, owned by a local resident named Alexander Tapuz. However, local populace of Woodstock actively organized and rejected the commercial proposal. Following this denial, the organizers shifted their logistical focus to the Winston Farm, located in Saugerties, New York.
Lang and Kornfeld operated under the assumption that they had secured the Saugerties location. However, municipal records indicate the landowner's attorney explicitly informed Roberts and Rosenman during a brief definitive meeting that the property was absolutely not available for lease. Because of these repeated failures to secure land, Roberts and Rosenman assumed control of the venue search completely, as they were the entities holding the primary financial risk.
They eventually discovered the Mills Industrial Park. This was a 300-acre site situated in the town of Wallkill, which is located in Orange County, New York. In the spring of 1969, Woodstock Ventures successfully leased this industrial park site for $10,000, which again translates to about $88,000 today. They assured the local Wallkill town officials that attendance would strictly not exceed their projected 50,000 people. However, the residents of Wallkill immediately organized a fierce opposition campaign against the project. This local resistance culminated in early July when the Wallkill Town Board passed a highly specific zoning law.
This new legislation formally required a specialized permit for any public gathering of over 5,000 people. The structural conditions attached to this new permit made it functionally impossible for the promoters to continue their stage and fencing construction at the Wallkill site. This resulted in an effective, legally binding ban on the festival within that municipality. The implementation of the Wallkill municipal ban generated a completely unexpected outcome. Rather than terminating the event's viability, the widespread national reporting of the ban functioned as a massive publicity bonanza for Woodstock Ventures.
The legal conflict with the town board elevated the festival's profile significantly in the national press. This saturation of media coverage indirectly drove further public interest and exponentially expanded the prospective attendance metrics far beyond their initial 50,000-person projection. This desperate situation brings us to the discovery of Max Yasgur's dairy farm in Bethel, New York. Now, if you look at the historical record, it actually contains highly conflicting accounts of how this specific site was found.
In his 2007 publication, author and local resident Elliot Tiber claims that he initially offered to host the event on his own motel grounds, as he already possessed a municipal permit for a music event. Tiber asserts that when his property proved too small, he personally introduced the promoters to the dairy farmer, Max Yasgur. Conversely, Michael Lang disputes Tiber's account entirely. Lang states that Tiber merely introduced him to a local real estate agent, and it was this realtor who drove Lang directly to Yasgur's farm without Tiber ever being present. Max Yasgur's son, Sam Yasgur, officially corroborates Michael Lang's version of the events in his own documented accounts.
Regardless of who made the introduction, the geography of the newly acquired site was highly specific and absolutely perfect for acoustics. It was a massive 600-acre dairy farm that formed a natural sloping bowl in the earth. The land slanted downward towards Filippini Pond, which sat on the northern side of the property. The organizers immediately designed the layout so the main stage would sit at the very bottom of this massive hill, utilizing the natural amphitheater acoustics, with Filippini Pond serving as a scenic backdrop. Interestingly, Filippini himself was the only landowner in the immediate vicinity who completely refused to sign a lease, allowing the promoters to use his property for overflow. And once again, following the pattern from Wallkill, the organizers assured the Bethel authorities that they expected no more than 50,000 people.
Securing the physical lease for the site did not resolve their regulatory challenges. The local populace of Bethel mounted immediate, highly visible opposition. Residents erected public signage bearing slogans such as "Buy No Milk." Despite these public protests, the bureaucratic permitting processes proceeded in a highly irregular and contradictory manner. Bethel Town Attorney Frederick W. Vichat, Building Inspector Donald Clark, and Town Supervisor Daniel Amatucci technically approved the initial structural permits.
However, the Betheltown Board formally convened and refused to issue them. Consequently, Building Inspector Clark was legally ordered by the board to post official stop work orders on the festival site, halting all construction. The resolution to this specific permit battle is one of the most remarkable pieces of history from the entire event. You have a massive stage half built, and suddenly there is a stop work order. Joel Rosenman recalls requesting a private face-to-face meeting with the building inspector, Don Clark. During this meeting, Rosenman directly confronted Clark.
They discussed the ethical and legal implications of withholding construction permits that had already been officially authorized by the relevant individuals, even if the board was blocking them. Rosenman highlighted the structural absurdity of the situation, noting that Clark literally had the authorized permits sitting in his shirt pocket. Following this negotiation, Inspector Clark yielded. He removed the physical permits from his pocket and provided them directly to Rosenman. Because they now possessed the physical documents, the stop work order was effectively neutralized.
The festival was allowed to proceed, pending backing by the State Department of Health and Agriculture, and under the incredibly strict municipal condition that all structures must be completely dismantled and removed from the property by September 1st, 1969. But even with the permits in hand, they were completely out of time. The timeline disruption caused by the late change in venue from Wallkill to Bethel created severe logistical deficiencies.
3 days prior to the scheduled start of the event, the primary construction foreman presented Joel Rosenman with a strict mathematical ultimatum. The labor force was insufficient to complete all tasks, forcing Rosenman to choose between two operational priorities. Option A was to complete the perimeter fencing and the ticket booths. From a financial perspective, without these structures, Roberts and Rosenman would face almost certain bankruptcy, as they would be completely unable to control access and collect gate revenue. Option B was to complete the main stage. Without the stage, they would be hosting hundreds of thousands of attendees with no actual facility for the musicians to perform.
That is the ultimate nightmare scenario for an entrepreneur. You can either build the gates to collect your money or build the stage to provide the product, but you cannot do both. The decision was actually made for them by the following morning, which was Wednesday. By that time, option A had completely vanished as a possibility. Overnight, 50,000 early birds had already arrived at the rural site and planted themselves directly in front of the half-finished stage. Because there were no fences yet built to keep them out, for the rest of the entire weekend, concert-goers simply walked right onto the site, completely regardless of whether they had purchased advance tickets or not.
This massive, uncontainable influx forced the organizers to abandon the construction of the fences entirely. It instantly transformed a meticulously planned, profit-making corporate venture into a mandatory free concert. This unavoidable pivot pushed Roberts and Rosenman to the brink of financial ruin prior to the commencement of any musical performances. An examination of the subsequent events reveals cascading logistical failures and the extreme crisis management required to sustain the gathering.
The influx of hundreds of thousands of individuals into the rural, two-lane infrastructure of Bethel resulted in a catastrophic regional traffic jam. The municipal government of Bethel chose not to enforce its municipal codes or attempt to disperse the crowd, operating under the tactical assessment that strict police enforcement would likely provoke mass panic and chaos among the unprecedented volume of people flowing toward the site. To mitigate the inbound volume, regional radio and television broadcasts actively transmitted bulletins discouraging the public from traveling to the festival zone.
The severe traffic congestion generated significant mythology. During the festival, the musician Arlo Guthrie made a highly publicized announcement from the microphone on stage, a moment which was later prominently included in the documentary film. He stated to the audience that the New York State Thruway was officially closed due to the volume of vehicles. However, the director of the official museum has stated through extensive archival research with the State Transportation Department that this closure never occurred.
The Thruway remained open. It was simply a myth born out of the sheer, terrifying scale of the congestion. The local roads were simply impassable, turning into massive parking lots. To compound these severe transportation issues, recent sporadic rain had completely transformed the dirt access roads and the open sloping fields into deep, treacherous mud. And the infrastructure failure was staggering. The facilities constructed were mathematically incapable of providing sufficient sanitation, hydration, or first aid for an audience of this magnitude.
Attendees experienced significant food shortages as delivery trucks could not penetrate the traffic gridlock. This led to heavily compromised hygiene conditions and continuous exposure to adverse meteorological events. Furthermore, the original operational plan for security was entirely compromised. The event's security was designated to be managed by a hired group of 346 off-duty New York City police officers. However, these officers were forced to withdraw at the last minute when they were officially warned by their department that working the festival would directly violate municipal police regulations against moonlighting.
So suddenly, there was no professional security force, and the political tension escalated dramatically because of this. On the morning of Sunday, August 17th, the governor of New York, Nelson Rockefeller, personally telephoned festival organizer John P. Roberts. The governor explicitly informed Roberts that he was closely monitoring the infrastructural collapse and was actively considering declaring a full state of emergency, which would involve ordering 10,000 National Guard troops to descend on the festival site to take control.
John P. Roberts successfully dissuaded the governor from this military deployment during the telephone conference, arguing that armed troops would likely incite a riot. Sullivan County did, however, officially declare a localized state of emergency. Order and logistics were partially salvaged by personnel from the nearby Stewart Air Force Base. These military personnel provided critical, non-combative assistance by airlifting performers, medical supplies, and essential personnel in and out of the site via military helicopter, bypassing the completely gridlocked roads.
We have to review the medical realities of the festival, too, because the historical data diverges significantly from popular mythology. Sociologically, the festival was statistically peaceful, considering the extreme population density and the total infrastructural collapse. However, the official medical records confirmed 3 fatalities on site. 2 of these deaths were formally attributed to narcotics overdoses. The 3rd fatality was the result of an agricultural accident, wherein a tractor accidentally ran over a 17-year-old individual who was sleeping unseen in a nearby hayfield.
Furthermore, medical logs indicate there were between 4 and 8 reported miscarriages during the event. Over the course of the 3 days, the hastily assembled medical staff treated a documented 742 drug overdoses. It is also imperative to definitively address the persistent claims regarding births occurring at the festival. While rumors circulated through the press that babies were born in vehicles caught in traffic or in local hospitals following helicopter airlifts, exhaustive research conducted by historical authors confirms there are 0 verified births directly associated with the festival.
Moving from the logistical failures, we have to look at the monumental technical triumphs that allowed this festival to function at all. Because without the engineering, it would have just been 500,000 people standing in a quiet field. Let us start with the sound. The acoustic engineering was spearheaded by an absolute pioneer in the field, a sound engineer named Bill Hanley. Hanley built custom speaker columns specifically designed for the hillsides. He deployed 16 massive loudspeaker arrays, arranged on a rigid square platform that elevated them onto 70-foot-high scaffolding towers.
Hanley noted in his schematics that he engineered the acoustic system to accommodate 150,000 to 200,000 people. This specification was mathematically over-engineered for the promoter's estimate of 50,000, yet ultimately insufficient for the 500,000 individuals who arrived. The physical construction of this system was immense. The Ailtech Corporation designed custom speaker cabinets utilizing heavy-duty marine plywood to withstand environmental exposure. Each single cabinet weighed 1/2 ton.
To put that into perspective for you, that is the weight of a grand piano or a small car, just for one speaker cabinet. They stood 6 feet tall, were almost 4 feet deep, and 3 feet wide. Inside each of these massive enclosures sat 4 15-inch JBL D140 loudspeakers to push the low end. The high frequencies were handled by massive tweeters consisting of 4x2 cell and 2x10 cell Altec horns. But speakers that big need incredible power. To power this colossal amplification setup, 3 massive electrical transformers were installed directly behind the main stage.
These transformers provided 2,000 amperes of electrical current. By comparison, a standard modern American residence operates on approximately 100 to 200 amperes. The acoustic configuration was continuously drawing sufficient power to supply a small residential neighborhood, strictly to project the audio to the perimeter of the crowd. For decades after the event, this specific sound system configuration was heavily referenced in the live music industry, collectively designated by audio engineers as the Woodstock bins.
The preservation of the audio was equally technically demanding. The live performances were meticulously recorded by audio engineers Eddie Kramer and Lee Osborne. They operated 2 8-track Scully recording consoles housed inside a soundproof tractor trailer located directly backstage. They captured the raw audio on 1-inch Scotch recording tape running at a high-fidelity speed of 15 inches per second. These raw, multi-track recordings were subsequently transported to Manhattan and extensively mixed to produce the subsequent commercial albums.
While the audio recording was successful, the lighting design presented severe structural challenges. The lighting was engineered by technical director E.H. Beresford Monk, widely known as Chip Monk. Monk was initially contracted for a 10-week period at a rate of $7,000 to meticulously plan and construct the staging and complex lighting rigs. Adjusted for inflation, that contract equates to roughly $61,000. However, the forced relocation from Wallkill required his entire original architectural plan to be discarded.
The organizers had to rush the construction of a new stage roof at the Bethel site. Once this new roof was built, it became immediately clear to the structural engineers that this hastily constructed canopy simply could not support the sheer weight of the heavy lighting equipment that Monk had already rented and transported to the site. As a result of this structural deficit, that expensive, highly specialized rented lighting gear sat completely unused underneath the stage for the entire duration of the festival. So, how did they solve the problem of illuminating a stage in the middle of a pitch-black rural dairy farm?
To illuminate the performers, Monk was forced to abandon fixed overhead lighting and rely entirely on high-intensity spotlights. His operational workaround utilized 12 1,300-watt Super Trooper follow spots. These were exceptionally heavy pieces of industrial equipment, weighing 600 pounds each. They were rigged on 4 separate scaffolding towers positioned strategically around the perimeter of the main stage. The operators were required to physically ascend the 60-foot high lighting towers and manually operate the 600-pound lights throughout the duration of the event.
That sounds absolutely grueling for the crew. And speaking of Chip Monk, he also found himself taking on a completely unexpected, highly visible role. Just before the concert was officially scheduled to begin on Friday, Michael Lang realized a glaring oversight. Amidst all the chaos of permits and fences, he'd completely forgotten to hire a master of ceremonies to introduce the bands and manage the stage flow. Consequently, Chip Monk, the lighting director, was drafted on the spot as the accidental MC.
An analysis of the primary audio recordings confirms that Monk's voice is the one executing the stage announcements between the musical acts. He delivered the publicized requests for attendees to stay off the structural towers due to safety concerns, and he broadcasted the critical medical warnings from the first aid tents regarding the, quote, brown acid. We must now conduct a meticulous chronological review of the 32 musical acts that performed over the course of the 4 days. This requires a detailed examination of the programming flow, which was severely impacted by logistical and meteorological variables.
Let us begin on Friday, August 15th, transitioning into the early hours of Saturday, August 16th. The festival officially opened with folk singer Richie Havens. He took the stage early, performing from 5:07 p.m. to 5:54 p.m. Havens was actually moved up to the opening performance slot in a moment of panic because the band originally scheduled to open the entire festival, Sweetwater, was stopped by local police while en route to the festival and could not get through the traffic. Following Havens' energetic set, Swami Satchidananda delivered the official opening speech and a spiritual invocation to the massive crowd.
Following the invocation, Sweetwater arrived via helicopter and executed their performance from 6:15 p.m. to 7:12 p.m. The subsequent act was Burt Summer, performing from 7:35 p.m. to 8:15 p.m. Summer notably received the festival's first documented standing ovation following his performance of the composition America. Tim Hardin followed, performing from 8:03 p.m. to 9:35 p.m. The meticulously planned schedule then encountered the first of several severe meteorological disruptions, fundamentally altering the performance dynamic.
Ravi Shankar performed from midnight to 12:40 a.m., playing his classical Indian set directly through the onset of heavy rain. Following Shankar, the incredible string band was scheduled to play, but their management officially declined to let them perform during the rainstorm, citing the danger of electrocution and damage to their acoustic instruments. Because they flat out refused to play in the rain, the organizers were left staring at a dark stage and a wet, restless crowd. They needed someone to fill the gap immediately.
The singer-songwriter Melanie was directed on stage for an unscheduled performance from 1:00 to 1:25 a.m. Historical accounts indicate the audience responded favorably, resulting in 2 subsequent encores. Arlo Guthrie then performed his set from 1:45 a.m. to 2:25 a.m. The initial night concluded with Joan Baez, who performed from 3:00 until 4:00 a.m. It is documented that Baez executed this hour-long performance during the early morning hours while 6 months pregnant.
The programming for the second day, Saturday, August 16th, transitioning into Sunday, August 17th, reflects continuous logistical adaptation by the stage managers. The band Quill opened the day at 12:15 p.m., playing until 1:00 p.m. Following them was an entirely unscheduled emergency solo performance by Country Joe McDonald from 1:40 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. McDonald was grafted into this slot because the scheduled act, Santana, was not yet physically prepared to take the stage due to logistical delays backstage.
Santana commenced their performance at 2 p.m., delivering a 45-minute set. In subsequent interviews, Carlos Santana publicly stated he was experiencing active hallucinations from mescaline ingestion throughout the majority of this performance, which impaired his visual perception of his instrument. Following Santana, John Sebastian performed from 3:30 p.m. to 3:55 p.m. Sebastian was not listed on the official promotional material. Organizers recruited him directly from the attending crowd to perform while they awaited the arrival of scheduled personnel via military airlift.
The Keith Hartley Band followed from 4:45 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. Then, the Incredible String Band, the group who had refused to play in the rain on Friday night, finally performed their set from 6 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Canned Heat played a long, blues-heavy set from 7:30 p.m. to 8:45 p.m. They were followed by Mountain, who performed from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. This massive stage appearance in front of 500,000 people was unbelievably only the third gig Mountain had ever played as a band.
The Grateful Dead subsequently took the stage at 10:30 p.m. Technical reports indicate their set was severely compromised by electrical grounding shocks from the wet stage surface. Their performance concluded at 11:50 p.m. with an extended 36-minute instrumental sequence. The transition into the early hours of Sunday morning introduces what can be classified as the midnight shift. This sequence featured several major headlining acts performing to an audience experiencing severe sleep deprivation and environmental fatigue.
Creedence Clearwater Revival, the very band whose initial contract signing made the whole festival financially viable, started their set at 12:30 a.m., playing until 1:20 a.m. Frontman John Fogerty later shared a highly vivid memory of this set. He said, "We were ready to rock out, and we waited and waited, and finally it was our turn. There were 500,000 people asleep. These people were out. It was sort of like a painting of a Dante scene, just bodies from hell all intertwined and asleep, covered with mud."
Fogerty noted that he continued the performance primarily due to observing a single individual in the distance igniting a lighter and vocalizing support. Following Creedence Clearwater Revival, Janis Joplin performed with the Cosmic Blues Band from 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. Sly and the Family Stone then delivered a highly energetic set from 3:30 a.m. to 4:20 a.m. The Who commenced their performance at 5 a.m. During their hour-long sequence, the set was briefly interrupted when political activist Abby Hoffman breached the stage and accessed the microphone.
Finally, closing out this unbelievable marathon night, Jefferson Airplane performed from 8:00 a.m. to 9:40 a.m., joined on stage on the piano by the legendary session musician Nicky Hopkins. The final sequence of scheduled performances began on Sunday, August 17th, extending extensively into the morning of Monday, August 18th. Joe Cocker and the Grease Band performed from 2:00 p.m. to 3:25 p.m., delivering his iconic rendition of "Bree Little Help from My Friends."
Following Cocker's set, severe meteorological events once again dictated the operational schedule. A massive thunderstorm swept across the site. This disruption impacted the power supply and necessitated a complete halt to all events for several hours to mitigate the risk of mass electrocution among attendees and personnel.
When the rain finally passed and the music resumed, Country Joe and the Fish played from 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m., making it Country Joe McDonald's second time performing over the weekend. 10 years after, performed an incredibly fast-paced set from 8:15 p.m. to 9:15 p.m., the band took the stage at 10 p.m., playing until 10:50 p.m., and were enthusiastically called back for an encore. Johnny Winter performed from midnight to 1:40 a.m. to 2:30 a.m., featuring his brother Edgar Winter on 3 songs.
Blood, Sweat, and Tears performed a brass-oriented set from 1:30 a.m. to 2:30 a.m. It is documented that this ensemble officially declined to participate in the documentary film or the official soundtrack album, citing severe dissatisfaction with the recorded acoustic quality of their performance. Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young played from 3:00 a.m. to 4:00 a.m., executing both an acoustic and an electric set. Neil Young explicitly chose to omit himself from the majority of the acoustic portion and issued demands for recording cameras to be deactivated during his performance.
The Paul Butterfield Blues Band played from 6:00 a.m. to 7:10 a.m. as the sun rose on Monday. Sha-Na-Na followed from 7:30 a.m. to 8 a.m. Their performance is historically notable because their guitarist, Henry Gross, was only 18 years old at the time, making him the youngest mainstage musician to perform at the entire festival. The culmination of the event occurred on Monday morning. Jimi Hendrix, backed by his newly assembled ensemble, took the stage at 9 a.m.
Due to the extensive delays caused by the thunderstorms and the sheer duration of the festival, the audience demographic had fundamentally shifted by Monday morning. When Hendrix initiated his performance, the massive crowd had depleted from an estimated peak of 450,000 individuals down to a statistical remainder of approximately 30,000 to 40,000 individuals. Hendrix was formally introduced as the Jimi Hendrix Experience. However, audio transcripts confirm he immediately utilized the microphone to correct the announcer.
He stated to the crowd that they decided to change the whole thing around and call it Gypsy Sun and Rainbows, adding that for short, it was nothing but a band of gypsies. They then performed a towering, experimental 2-hour set. This performance concluded with his historic, heavily distorted rendition of the national anthem, a profound cultural touchstone that officially closed the festival at 11 a.m. on Monday morning. To fully comprehend the historical scope of this event, we have to examine the data regarding the almosts.
The almost category encompasses the extensive list of prominent artists who declined invitations or experienced missed connections. Logistical failures directly prevented certain scheduled performances from occurring. The musical group Iron Butterfly was officially booked to appear and is permanently listed on the original promotional poster for a Sunday performance. However, they failed to perform due to being immobilized by transit delays at LaGuardia Airport in New York City.
Right, the production coordinator, John Morris, received a demanding telegram from the band's management. The telegram insisted that special helicopters be sent to pick them up at the airport, fly them directly to the stage, and immediately fly them out after they played, bypassing all the chaos. Morris, dealing with a disaster on the ground, responded with a sharply worded telegram of his own. It read, "For reasons I can't go into, until you are here, clarifying your situation, knowing you are having problems, you will have to find other transportation, unless you plan not to come." They obviously did not come.
The artistess from Mohawk successfully navigated to the geographical area, but her assigned transit operator executed a navigational error on the rural roads. Archival interviews detail her arrival at the parking facility precisely as the final musical sequence of the initial night concluded, resulting in a completely missed performance window. Geopolitical and legal hurdles of 1969 significantly shaped the roster as well.
The organizers recognized that the Beatles were dissolving as a unit and formally invited John Lennon and the Plastic Ono Band. However, John Lennon was unable to attend due to 2 distinct legal factors. First, a 1968 narcotics conviction in the United Kingdom, and second, the United States government's strict stance regarding his vocal opposition to the Vietnam War, which complicated his visa status. And we are just reporting the historical context of his visa denial here, not endorsing his political positions or the government's response.
That is correct. Municipal and federal immigration records confirm these legal barriers. Apple Corps transmitted formal correspondence offering the Plastic Ono Band, but the documentation arrived during the chaotic transitional period when the promoters were losing the Wallkill site, preventing final contractual execution. Similarly, the artist Donovan was formally denied a United States work visa by immigration authorities due to a prior narcotics conviction in his jurisdiction of origin.
Beyond logistics and strict visa laws, pure skepticism and mundane scheduling conflicts kept massive names away from the defining event of the decade. The Doors were heavily considered, but they canceled at the last minute. Guitarist Robbie Krieger stated they turned it down because they cynically feared it would be a second-class repeat of the Monterey Pop Festival. Bob Dylan actually lived right there in the town of Woodstock, but he never seriously negotiated to appear.
Documentation indicates Dylan opted to perform at the Isle of Wight Festival in the United Kingdom instead. He was scheduled to transit via the Queen Elizabeth II maritime vessel on the exact date the festival commenced, but a familial medical incident involving his son and a cabin door forced a delay in his transit schedule. Jethro Tull also received a formal invitation. The frontman, Ian Anderson, stated on the record that he recognized the scale of the event, but actively declined participation due to a strong aversion to the countercultural demographic, widespread alcohol consumption, and narcotic use.
Frank Zappa, performing with the Mothers of Invention at the time, also declined. Zappa later simply stated to the press, "A lot of mud at Woodstock. We were invited to play there. We turned it down." Managerial interventions within the music industry further altered the final lineup. The band Chicago had initially signed a binding contract to play Woodstock. However, they were managed by the highly prominent and aggressive concert promoter, Bill Graham.
Graham executed a strategic contractual maneuver. He forced Chicago to dissolve the Woodstock contract by rescheduling their tour dates at the Fillmore West in California. Graham executed this specifically to ensure that another musical group under his management, Santana, would secure Chicago's designated performance slot at the festival, thereby elevating Santana's national profile. Similarly, the band It's a Beautiful Day possessed a verbal agreement to perform.
Their manager, who's also Bill Graham, agreed with Michael Lang to flip a coin to decide whether It's a Beautiful Day or Santana would perform the set. Graham won the coin toss, resulting in Santana's historic performance. Other artists just couldn't see the vision at all. Tommy James and the Shondells declined an invitation. James later recounted the decision, saying, "We could have just kicked ourselves. We were in Hawaii, and my secretary called and said, 'Yeah, listen, there's this pig farmer in upstate New York that wants you to play in his field.'"
James stated that upon realizing the actual scale of the event subsequent to its execution, the organization recognized a significant missed opportunity. The statistical volume of artists who decline for mundane logistical reasons is substantial. The Byrds declined due to fatigue associated with the festival circuit. Eric Clapton was outvoted by the remaining members of his ensemble Blind Faith. The Jeff Beck group systematically disbanded mere days prior to the event's commencement.
Led Zeppelin's manager turned it down because he felt they would have just been another band on a crowded bill. Joni Mitchell canceled to appear on the Dick Cavett television show instead. The Moody Blues backed out to take a guaranteed gig in Paris. Procol Harum refused because their guitarist's baby was due. The Rolling Stones declined because Mick Jagger was filming a movie in Australia and Keith Richards' girlfriend had just given birth. Simon and Garfunkel were busy working on an album in the studio. Even Bruce Springsteen's early band, Steel Mill, was reportedly offered a slot but had a scheduling conflict.
We must critically analyze the immediate media narrative surrounding the event and the subsequent commercial documentation that shaped its legacy. Initially, the media presence on the ground was minimal, and the resulting coverage in the national press was overwhelmingly negative, focusing entirely on the infrastructural collapse. The New York Times published a scathing editorial titled "Nightmare in the Catskills," explicitly comparing the attendees to lemmings marching to their deaths in a nightmare of mud and stagnation.
The Daily News ran front-page headlines such as "Traffic Uptight at Hippie Fest" and "Hippies Mired in a Sea of Mud." However, a definitive shift in the national media narrative occurred by the end of the weekend. This pivot was driven entirely by data provided by the attendees' parents. The parents began calling the media outlets directly to correct the journalistic record, relaying the positive, peaceful reports they were receiving via payphone calls from their children at the festival site.
Inside the press corps, there were intense professional disputes over this shifting narrative. Bernard Collier, reporting directly from the site for the New York Times, stated he experienced heavy pressure from editorial staff in Manhattan to produce misleadingly negative copy focusing on the infrastructural disaster. Collier engaged in acrimonious telephonic discussions with his superiors, threatening to withhold his reporting entirely until the executive editor, James Reston, authorized the publication of factual data reflecting the cooperation and nonviolent nature of the crowd.
Local reporting faced immense physical hurdles just to get the news out. The Times-Herald Record, a paper out of Middletown, New York, had the only functioning phone line running out of the site. They had to use a motorcyclist to physically weave through the impassable crowds and the gridlocked cars to deliver written stories and photographic film to the newspaper's office 35 miles away. But the true documentation of the event came through film.
The commercial preservation of the event was secured through the 1970 documentary film simply titled Woodstock. Artie Kornfeld approached Fred Weintraub, an executive at Warner Bros., requesting capital to film the festival. Weintraub secured $100,000 for the project, which equates to approximately $880,000 today. He executed this transaction expressly against the directives of other senior Warner Bros. Executives, placing his corporate tenure in immediate jeopardy.
The financial structure of the film production was highly irregular. The director, Michael Wadley, assembled a massive crew of about 100 people from the independent New York film scene. Because there was absolutely no upfront capital available to pay their daily wages, Wadley negotiated a risky double-or-nothing scheme. The crew agreed that they would receive double their standard union pay if the film succeeded commercially, and absolutely nothing if it failed to find a distributor.
The documentary was meticulously edited from hundreds of hours of raw footage by a crew headed by Martin Scorsese and Thelma Schoonmaker, and it was theatrically released in March 1970. The release was a massive critical and commercial success, subsequently winning the Academy Award for Documentary Feature. It permanently solidified the cultural legacy of the festival and functioned as a massive financial windfall, effectively rescuing the Warner Bros. Studio from impending bankruptcy.
And crucially for Roberts and Rosenman, the massive revenue from the film distribution paid off the staggering $1.4 million debt they had personally incurred from producing the festival and abandoning the ticket gates. Beyond the visual film, the sheer volume of audio releases over the decades has been extraordinary, turning the weekend into a perpetual commercial product. There were the original multi-disc soundtrack albums in the 1970s, then the 25th, 30th, and 40th anniversary remastered editions.
This commercialization culminated in 2019 with the definitive 50th anniversary archival release. This physical unit contained 38 compact discs, totaling 36 hours of continuous audio. It included 432 compositions, 276 of which had been previously unreleased to the public. To mathematically reflect the chronological year of the festival, this extensive collection was strictly limited to a precise production run of 1,969 units.
Finally, we must evaluate the immediate municipal aftermath, the structural legacy of the land, and the present-day economic impact of the festival site. The immediate local political fallout in Sullivan County was severe. In the November 1969 municipal elections, the local voters of Bethel ousted town supervisor Daniel Amatucci, explicitly holding him responsible for his bureaucratic role in allowing the festival to occur within their borders.
The margin of Amatucci's electoral defeat was statistically minuscule, recorded in the municipal voting ledgers as a differential of between 6 and 50 votes. Furthermore, approximately 80 civil lawsuits were filed against Woodstock Ventures in the months following the event, initiated primarily by local agricultural entities seeking financial compensation for property damage and crop losses. In direct response to the infrastructural collapse, the New York State Legislature and the town of Bethel rapidly enacted strict mass gathering legislation designed to legally prevent any future gatherings of this magnitude.
Max Yasgur, the man who provided the land, refused to rent out his farm for a proposed 1970 revival of the festival. He told the press, "As far as I know, I'm going back to running a dairy farm." Yasgur passed away just a few years later in 1973. For years, the subsequent private owners of the site actively tried to prevent people from visiting the famous field. They went so far as spreading raw chicken manure across the fields to create a terrible smell to deter trespassers.
During specific anniversary milestones, heavy agricultural machinery and state police vehicles were deployed to establish physical roadblocks to prevent tourist access. However, the sociological draw of the location persisted. In 1984, local landowners Louis Nicky and June Geelish authorized the installation of a permanent monument marker engineered by sculptor Wayne C. Saward to provide a centralized gathering point for visitors.
The historical preservation and subsequent commercialization of the site accelerated significantly in 1996 when cable television pioneer Alan Jerry purchased the acreage. This land acquisition led to the systematic development of the Bethel Woods Center for the Arts, a modern amphitheater facility which officially opened in 2006. 2 years later, in 2008, a comprehensive multimedia museum dedicated to the festival was established directly on the grounds. In February 2017, the 600-acre site was formally listed on the National Register of Historic Places.
Over the decades, organizations have executed numerous operational attempts to commemorate the major anniversaries. In 2009, for the 40th anniversary, the Bethel Woods Center hosted an 8-hour concert featuring a large assembly of performing alumni from the 1969 event, concluding with a headline performance by the Levon Helm Band. However, the subsequent attempt to organize a 50th anniversary festival in 2019 resulted in comprehensive logistical and financial failure.
Despite securing a highly publicized lineup featuring both legacy artists like John Fogerty alongside contemporary pop acts, the structural planning rapidly deteriorated. In April 2019, the primary financial investors pulled their backing entirely, formally citing in the press a complete loss of faith in the event's infrastructural preparations and permit acquisitions. Despite the producers vehemently denying the cancellation and desperately attempting to secure alternative venues across multiple states, the event was officially canceled in July 2019.
Despite the modern organizational failure of the 50th anniversary event, the cultural and economic footprint of the original 1969 festival remains highly measurable. Pop culture references are heavily embedded within contemporary society. The cartoonist Charles Schulz designated the avian character in the Peanuts comic strip as Woodstock in direct tribute to the event. In 2019, the United States Postal Service issued an official forever stamp commemorating the 50th anniversary. Contemporary musical artists have integrated textual references into their compositions.
Just recently, in 2023, there was even a failed attempt by a South Korean organizer to purchase the official licensing rights to hold a branded Woodstock festival in Pocheon, which ultimately collapsed due to insufficient preparation. But the absolute most staggering figure to me is the sheer economic reality of the original site today. According to a comprehensive 2018 financial report, the Bethel Woods Center has generated an unbelievable $560.82 million in spending for the state of New York. Since the center opened in 2006, the preserve site has drawn 2.9 million paying visitors.
When evaluating the entirety of this historical and financial data, a compelling analytical dichotomy emerges for your consideration. Consider the profound irony that an event universally remembered as the ultimate spontaneous anti-capitalist utopian gathering only survived in the cultural memory because of a highly calculated, desperate corporate film deal designed exclusively to save its original promoters from total financial ruin. How does the ongoing multi-million-dollar commercialization of the documentation and the physical site conflict with the anti-commercial ethos attributed to the event itself?
Thanks for listening.